Hello, everybody, and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. My name is Don Arleth. Torrential downpours wreaked havoc across Central Europe, killing at least 21 people and causing massive flooding. The damage could run into the billions of euros, and the cleanup will take months, if not years. Extreme weather events like these often bring a connotation with them, that is, that they are due to human influence or the environment or climate change. And now joining us to discuss is Associate Professor and UNESCO Chair on Eco-Hydrology and Applied Ecology, Iwona Wagner. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Good afternoon. My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, thank you. So when we look at extreme weather events like these, I mean, just torrential downpours that drop so much rain in such a short amount of time, like I just mentioned, we often associate this with climate change, but obviously the fact that we're building cities bigger, the fact that there's more concrete surrounding us, and there's not always a good infrastructure for water when it falls at such a dramatic pace. How much of this is due to the infrastructure that's been built up, and how much of this is due to climate change?
Thank you for this question. There was a lot in it, but actually I don't think that any of us is in a position to say how much it is due to any of those factors. All the factors contribute. And so maybe starting from the climate change that you have mentioned, I think, first of all, I think that we should have been expected that it's coming. It was really only a matter of time. We know about climate change and that it's accelerating for decades now. The first report of IPCC was published in 1997. And already at that time, we knew that the extremes will happen and that they will come more and more intense with time if we don't act effectively on the anthropogenic emission of the CO2. And of course, I think that everybody probably knows already now that we are not cutting the CO2 emissions effectively. In the world scale, different countries, different continents are doing the job differently, but in general, in a global scale, the CO2 concentration is rising, temperature is rising, extremes happen more often, and they will happen more often in the future if we don't stop this. But this is only one part of the whole situation. The other one, for me, is actually how we are doing with the biodiversity, with the landscape, with ecosystems. And here is also not the point that we have passed the exam. The biodiversity is falling down. The healthy ecosystems are really rare in Europe and in the world these days. And this is for the first time in the human history that over 1 million of species is in danger. And well, one may say, what does it have to do with flood? Yes, it does, because I worry that a little bit too often our discussion about the flood is concentrated in the river itself already. But we must remember that river reflects what is happening with our landscape and with the nature in so-called catchment. And catchment is the whole area from where water flows down to the river, and eventually it may, or the water may or may not make the flood in the river corridor. So actually, what we are really missing is the holistic approach, looking at the whole catchment, not only at the situation in the river.
Yes, so, you know, in the future, how do we prevent, I mean, we know that these events are going to be more frequent, so what do we need to do to prepare for them better and trying to prevent the impact of such torrential downpours?
Yeah, probably most of the people automatically have the infrastructure in their minds, because I really think that we are all victims of the several years of the narrative of the hydrotechnical infrastructure, and which is really overwhelming, and start the people to believe that we can solve the problem with the infrastructure or the technical infrastructure. But I want to emphasize this whole sphere which lies in between the rains and the infrastructure in the river. In here we have the whole area where we have a lot of opportunities to act. So first of all, this is a better management of the landscape, but better spatial planning that includes well, actually, everything that has been said in the nature restoration law. So this is increasing the area of forests, restoring wetlands, which are a perfect sponge for catching the water before it reaches the river. Of course, there are also things to do in the cities themselves, because cities are, as you said before, oversealed. But of course, we must put everything in the proportion. The flood like this, the flood as we have for the last days, it's not because of the over sealing of the cities themselves. This is the whole catchment. Well, unfortunately, in the area of Poland and Czech Republic, this is the part of the Eastern Europe where the rains are going to happen more often, and this is also hilly area. This is mountains and sub-mountains regions where the water flows down very quickly. So this is especially important to really think carefully about what we want to do in the landscape. So more forests, more wetlands, very careful with the technical infrastructure, especially the one that goes along the slopes and accelerates the water outflow. For instance, the roads or the paths in the forests, which are very often also used to pull out the forests, the trees from the forests. Basically, I think that in the mountain and the sub-mountain regions, the forestry that is focused on the timber production should not take place at all. And all the forests should have the retention function. This is what is really important.
Mm. And you mentioned biodiversity earlier. What kind of effect do floods like these have on the ecosystems, the local ecosystems of these rivers and the tributaries that flow into them?
Well, the more complex the natural system is, the better it provides so-called ecosystem services. What are the ecosystem services? These are all the benefits that are provided by ecosystems to people. For instance, forests can store the rainfall very effectively by several natural processes. So first of all, this is interception, which is catching the water on the leaves, on the trunks of the trees. Then this water slows down before it reaches the ground, which is already a process that improves the infiltration and the organic matter in the soil and several layers of vegetation in the forest. All this works like a sponge, or if you like a pillow. If you put a city inside of a pillow and this pillow would absorb the water, then there is very little proportion of it that flows down to the river, and we don't have really the problem with the with a high amount of water in the stream. And then biodiversity is actually a measure that reflects the complexity of the ecosystem. And well, we can talk about biodiversity on the level of genes. We can talk about the population, we can talk about biodiversity at the level of different species, so species diversity, but biodiversity is also the diversity of the landscape. So the more diverse landscape, the more full of different species that can cooperate together, work in different situations, in the rain, in the drought, in high, low temperatures, so they have their own specialities, let's say, then the system is just more stable. This is like diversification of investment in economy. This is exactly the same. We need the diversity in the ecosystem, that it makes the ecosystems more stable.
Yes, and it seems like, well, we keep expanding and developing more and more land, and to our own detriment. Iwona Wagner, Associate Professor, UNESCO Chair on Eco-Hydrology. and applied ecology. Thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your insight.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Thank you for joining us, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.